At the start of the story, the film took us deep into a remote prison in Siberia. Rows of German soldiers stood in silence, prisoners of war captured after World War II. Russia had taken thousands of German soldiers captive and forced them into brutal labor, working day and night in coal mines. Security inside the prison was surprisingly light, but escape was unthinkable. The prison sat in the middle of endless ice, more than 14,000 kilometers away from the nearest human settlement. Even if someone managed to break out, the frozen wilderness guaranteed death long before freedom. Surrounded by thousands of kilometers of snow, this place was designed to crush hope itself. Yet among these prisoners was one man who refused to surrender. His name was Clemens Farel, a sharp-minded captive sentenced to 25 years behind these walls. Clemens had a wife and a daughter waiting for him, and he couldn't accept the idea of wasting half his life in this frozen hell. No matter the cost, he wanted out. One day, fate gave him a chance. Clemens slipped onto a coal transport train and escaped the prison grounds. When he finally stepped outside and saw the open sky filled with stars, he felt free for the first time in years. But that freedom didn't last long. The train was stopped just a short distance away. As Clemens looked out, a Russian soldier stood there, gun pointed straight at him. He was caught. This time, punishment was brutal. For attempting to escape, Clemens was thrown into an open-air cell. The cold was unbearable, and rain during the night pushed his body to the limit. He wasn't kept there for hours, but for 2 full days. After 2 days, the next morning, the warden came and pulled him out. There was no torture, no shouting, just one cold sentence. His fellow prisoners were waiting for him. When Clemens was taken to them, he finally understood what that meant. The other prisoners stood there holding sticks and clubs, furious. Because of his escape attempt, they had been starved for 2 days. The moment they saw him, they attacked. Clemens was beaten so badly that he had to be rushed to the prison hospital. The doctor there was also a German prisoner. When Clemens finally regained consciousness, his first words shocked the doctor. He said he wanted to escape again, and this time, he needed help. The doctor was stunned by his will. After everything Clemens had endured, he still hadn't broken. The doctor warned him that escaping alive was nearly impossible. Even if he made it out, the Siberian cold would surely kill him. But there was another truth. If Clemens stayed, death was almost certain anyway. The coal mines were filled with carbon-heavy air that slowly poisoned the workers, leading to deadly diseases like cancer. That's when the doctor made his decision. He told Clemens to try escaping one last time. He gave him everything he had, warm clothes, boots, supplies, and revealed that Russian soldiers hid their food near the railway tracks. He even handed Clemens a gun for protection. The doctor had been preparing to escape himself, but a week earlier, he had learned the truth. He was dying of cancer, with less than a month left to live. Before Clemens left, the doctor gave him a lunchbox and made one final request. If Clemens survived, he was to deliver it to the doctor's family and tell them he was gone. That night, under the cover of darkness, Clemens escaped again. This time, he didn't rely on trains. He chose to walk. He kept moving all night, and even after sunrise, he didn't stop. Fear drove him forward, fear that Russian soldiers were close behind. When the warden discovered Clemens had escaped again, he went straight to the doctor's room for answers. But before the warden arrived, the doctor had taken his own life. He knew what awaited him if Clemens' escape was discovered. Enraged, the warden ordered multiple Russian soldiers to hunt Clemens down and bring him back alive. Days passed. Still, no trace. Luck was finally on Clemens' side. Heavy snowfall erased his footprints, making him almost impossible to track. Slowly, everyone began to believe the cold had claimed him. Everyone except the warden. He knew Clemens was strong. He knew he wouldn't give up that easily. The search continued. Meanwhile, Clemens pressed forward, pushing through the snowstorm with sheer determination, fighting the frozen wilderness as he moved deeper into the unknown. 9 days after escaping the prison, Clemens suddenly heard dogs barking. He turned around and saw a sled racing straight toward him. Before he could react, it rushed past him and disappeared into the distance. That's when his eyes snapped open. It had only been a dream. In reality, Clemens had been walking nonstop for 9 days. His food was gone. Hunger and exhaustion had pushed his body to the edge, but he refused to stop. Step by step, he kept moving forward. After several more days, his body finally gave out. Starving and weak, Clemens collapsed and lost consciousness. Hours later, he woke up to a strange sound nearby. As he looked around, he spotted a seal. His eyes lit up instantly. For the first time in days, survival felt possible again. He raised his gun and took aim with all the strength he had left, but his hands trembled from exhaustion. The shot missed, and the seal started to flee. Clemens couldn't let this chance slip away. He ran after it, but the ice beneath him cracked, sending him plunging into freezing water. His leg was injured in the fall, but even then, he didn't stop. As he prepared to fire again, the seal disappeared behind a rock. Clemens moved forward, spotted it once more, and just before it slipped back into the water, he fired his final bullet. This time, it hit. Clemens broke down in relief. For the first time in days, food was no longer a worry. He ate properly, rested, and then continued his journey. The road ahead was endless and silent. He was completely alone, surrounded by nothing but snow. To keep himself from losing his mind, Clemens talked to himself, repeating positive thoughts just to stay focused. He constantly checked his compass, terrified of getting lost in the frozen wasteland. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. After nearly 2 months of walking, Clemens spotted something small in the distance, a single tree. The sight filled him with joy. He ran toward it and hugged it like a treasure. That tree was proof. He had finally crossed the frozen plains. Ahead of him, the forest was beginning. Soon, the snowfields faded behind him, and the forest took over. Clemens gathered wood, lit a fire, and for the first time in months, slept peacefully. Whether the next day would bring safety or danger, no one could say. Meanwhile, the warden was still hunting him. He ordered his men to search every area within a 500-kilometer radius. Back in the wilderness, Clemens was moving through the forest when a violent snowstorm suddenly struck. The wind was so powerful that massive trees were ripped from the ground. As Clemens struggled forward, one enormous tree crashed down on him. Luck saved him again. That evening, 2 men passed through the area, searching for gold. They spotted Clemens just in time and pulled him free, saving his life. The 3 men continued together, and after days of travel, they finally escaped the frozen lands. Along the way, they reached a river. To cross it, they built a wooden raft. As they drifted across, they talked, sharing childhood stories. But suddenly, the river's current grew stronger, and the raft spun out of control. One man lost his balance and fell into the water. He couldn't swim and began to drown. Without hesitation, Clemens jumped in. Fighting the current, he dragged the man to shore and saved his life. The third man, however, abandoned them. Greedy and selfish, he assumed they would die and walked away, taking his companion's gold with him. Later, when Clemens and the rescued man reached the tent, the betrayal became clear. Furious, the man confronted his former partner and shot him dead. After that, Clemens and the remaining survivor gathered their supplies and continued the journey forward. The 2 men kept walking for months, driven by nothing but the hope of finding human civilization. Then winter returned. Once again, the forest disappeared under a thick white blanket of snow. The supplies the man was carrying were heavy, making it harder for him to move through the snow. Seeing his struggle, Clemens offered to help and asked him to hand over some of the load. But suspicion had already taken root. The man believed Clemens was after his gold. Without warning, he attacked. Clemens was shoved to the ground and knocked unconscious. When he came to, he heard growling. A pack of wolves was closing in. Fighting panic, Clemens tried to climb a nearby tree. As he climbed, one of the wolves grabbed his leg. The tree itself was weak, it snapped in half, sending Clemens crashing back to the ground. In that moment, he was certain this was the end. Then, gunshots rang out. Clemens opened his eyes to see several wolves lying dead, the rest fleeing into the forest. Local hunters had arrived just in time. They carried him back to their village, where the villagers treated his injuries. After years of struggle, Clemens had finally reached human civilization. The sight of people filled him with overwhelming relief. He stayed in the village for several days, cared for and welcomed like family. But one day, a letter arrived, sent by the warden himself. It warned that a German soldier had escaped from prison, and anyone who sheltered him would be labeled a traitor. Clemens had no choice. If he stayed, the villagers would suffer for it. He decided to leave. Before he went, the villagers gave him food, supplies, and a hunting dog. For the first time in this long journey, Clemens wasn't alone. He and the dog traveled together for days. Along the way, they came across a lumber mill. The dog ran toward it, searching for food, and Clemens followed to protect him. Inside, the workers recognized Clemens and brought him to the mill owner. There, Clemens told his entire story. Moved by his suffering, they fed him and arranged for him to board a train heading toward Germany. Clemens believed the nightmare was finally over. What he didn't know was that the mill owner had already informed the warden. The warden and his soldiers were waiting at the station. Before the train reached the platform, Clemens spotted the Russian soldiers from a distance. The moment he saw them, he jumped from the moving train and ran. The soldiers chased him. He crossed the tracks in a desperate sprint, and suddenly, the warden appeared right in front of him. Years of struggle flashed through Clemens' mind. It felt like everything was about to end. Before the warden could grab him, Clemens' dog lunged forward, attacking and biting the warden. Once again, Clemens had a chance to escape. He ran with everything he had. Then a gunshot echoed behind him. When Clemens looked back, his heart shattered. His dog lay motionless on the ground. Devastated, Clemens didn't stop. He forced himself forward, pushing through the pain. He climbed onto a bridge and leapt down onto a train passing below, escaping once again from the warden's grasp. Time passed. Days turned into years as Clemens slowly continued his journey. By 1952, 7 years had passed since his escape. Now, he found himself in Central Asia, wandering through a village fair, still moving, still surviving, and still searching for the end of his long road to freedom. At the fair, Clemens saw stalls filled with food. His stomach begged him to stop, but he had no money, so he forced himself to keep walking. Then he noticed 2 young women selling pancakes. He wanted one desperately, but his pockets were empty. Disappointed, he turned away. One of the girls noticed him, felt pity, and broke off a piece of pancake, handing it to him. At first, Clemens hesitated. Then he quietly thanked them and ate it. Nearby, a Jewish man had been watching everything. Later, Clemens entered a church, and the same man followed him inside. He wasn't there to turn him in. Long ago, he had been a prisoner himself. Instead of reporting Clemens, he chose to help him. He took Clemens to his home. For the first time in years, Clemens shaved, cleaned himself, and began to look like his old self again. The man then gave him a new passport, one that could help him cross the Russian border and finally reach Germany. Grateful beyond words, Clemens thanked him and began his journey toward the border. Weeks later, he finally arrived. With his heart racing, Clemens handed his passport to the Russian guard. He feared being recognized. He feared the fake documents would be exposed. But nothing happened. The guard waved him through. Clemens couldn't stop himself from smiling. He was finally free. Ahead of him stood a bridge. On the other side was Germany. Home. As he reached the halfway point, a sudden bright light hit his face. When he looked up, his heart froze. The warden stood in front of him. Clemens turned back and realized he was still on Russian soil. The warden could arrest him right now. Years of suffering, years of sacrifice, about to be erased. Then something unexpected happened. The warden stepped aside. He allowed Clemens to pass. For a moment, Clemens couldn't believe it. But then he moved forward. The warden had seen his strength, his will to survive, and his courage. He didn't stop him. He simply said this was never about nations. It was a fight between 2 soldiers, and Clemens had won. Clemens crossed the border and finally returned to Germany. Soon, he reached his hometown. He saw his wife and daughter. A little later, they left for church, and Clemens followed them inside. He hadn't called out to his daughter yet. Somewhere deep down, she had always believed her father would return. When she turned around, she recognized him instantly. She ran into his arms. His wife, seeing him alive after all these years, was overwhelmed with joy. The 3 of them embraced at last. And with that, the film, based on a true story, came to an end. If you enjoyed this story, hit like and subscribe for more real stories like this.